12 House Republicans voted in favor of price caps on co-payments for insulin. It's not even legislation meant to limit the amount of money patients spend on insulin itself. It only has to do with co-pays, and only 12 House Republicans voted in favor of it. Matt Gaetz was not one of them. Now, in an effort to explain his no vote on this legislation, which luckily did pass the House, but will unlikely pass in the Senate, he put out this statement. Here's what he said. In his newsletter Friday, Gaetz told his constituents that he opposed the bill because fat people, not Big Pharma, are responsible for driving up the cost of insulin. He suggested that type 2 diabetes, which is often linked to obesity, could be cured if only people would work out more and lose weight, at which point they wouldn't need insulin anymore and the drug costs would fall without government intervention. Now, the statement is more than callous. It's also incredibly ignorant, and I'll explain why in just a moment. But here's what his newsletter said specifically, verbatim. While Democrat posturing of HR 6833 victimizes insulin payees as people with an uncontrollable disease that are being taken advantage of and need Big Brother to throw them a raft, lifestyle changes en masse would expeditiously lower demand and the subsequent prices of insulin. 90 to 95% of people with diabetes have type 2 diabetes, which can be prevented or delayed with healthy lifestyle changes, such as losing weight, eating healthy food, and being active. Now, of course, he noted a statistic there, 90 to 95%. Notably, there was no evidence for that statistic whatsoever. But I just want to be clear, there are many people who have diabetes who did not make lifestyle decisions to have it. Meaning it's not related to obesity, it's not related to their inactivity or lack of exercise. I have a family member who has diabetes as a result of medication she is forced to take as a result of a different condition, which has nothing to do with her lifestyle choices. So many Americans deal with the same thing. And by the way, even if 100% of Americans were dealing with 100% of Americans with diabetes were suffering from it as a result of obesity, who the hell is Matt Gaetz to tell them, no, pharmaceutical companies get to price gouge you as much as they want. And as we know, this is really just price gouging. There was a giant story about Senator Joe Manchin's daughter when she was the CEO of Mylan Pharmaceuticals. She struck a deal with Pfizer to prevent them from putting out a generic version of the EpiPen. And the reason why she did that was to ensure that the EpiPen would be monopolized and she could charge whatever she wanted for it. And then she agreed to share some of those profits with Pfizer, essentially breaking all sorts of antitrust laws, which she was never held accountable for because her father happens to be one of the worst US senators of all time. But he also says in his newsletter, arbitrary price controls are no substitute for individual weight control. Since 2000, the number of diabetes cases in the United States has nearly doubled. The demand for insulin has increased and the requisite price increases has followed suit. In other words, the price of insulin increases as waistlines increase. And strong words for Matt Gaetz. I wish the media actually cared about this story and covered it more, because the fact of the matter is there's a huge portion of Florida that not only has diabetes, but they're also being price gouged thanks to the price of insulin. More than a quarter of Florida residents are obese, including Matt Gaetz's favorite Palm Beach resident, former President Donald Trump. And more than 10% of the state's population suffers from diabetes, not all of which, of course, is caused by lifestyle factors. Got more details, which we'll get to in just a minute. But Cenk, why don't you jump in?
Yeah, so we showed on a previous show that this is not an isolated incident, not just for Matt Gaetz, but for several Republican congresspeople and so-called thought leaders, God help us on what thoughts they're leading. But they're attacking overweight people and blaming them. Previously, it was mainly for COVID. Now it's also in this case for diabetes and the price of insulin. And I guess it's a way to try to get the attention off of their giant big pharmaceutical donors. So I don't know that Matt Gaetz has those, to be fair about it. So I don't know what his motivation is, but for him, it might just be an extra way to be mean and to bully people, because that's basically what the Republican politicians have become, just the worst bullies you've ever seen. So look, if you think the comments that Anna read are not bad enough, he's gone after overweight people on at least 4 different occasions. I'll give you one here. He said he decried, quote, this is from other journals, he decried, quote, woke culture for, quote, cheerleading for the chubbies. So this is a guy who has been attacking people based on their weight for a long time. And I guess in his bro culture, that's really funny. Him and the bros laugh about it. Like, yeah, she's overweight and so is he. And I think that he probably gets a psychological kick out of it. But overall, the main reason Republicans are doing it is to protect their beloved drug company donors.
By the way, I mean, while Democrats probably want a pat on the back for passing this very narrow piece of legislation in the House, which is very unlikely to pass in the Senate, I'm gonna go after them in a moment, but I'm not done with Matt Gaetz just yet. And more importantly, the so-called pro-life Republicans who are only pro-life in the context of being able to control a woman's body. So let's say we play devil's advocate, right? And we just go along with what Matt Gaetz is arguing here, that the majority of people who have diabetes have it because they can't control their eating, they're not getting enough exercise. Okay, so what Matt Gaetz is advocating for, along with the majority of his Republican colleagues in the House, is for people who can't afford this medication, people who can't afford insulin, to just die. That is what they are effectively advocating for. He is saying, because that's how this works, guys. Everyone knows this is how it works. If you can't afford the medication and you have diabetes, what happens to you? You die. You don't take the medication, you don't get the insulin you need. And then these clowns want to turn around and claim that they're pro-life. They're pro-life, again, only under incredibly narrow circumstances. And those narrow circumstances include a woman being able to make a decision about her own body. Because the anti-abortion movement in this country has always been and always will be about control, about accumulating political power, and about punishment toward women who engage in sexual activity for pleasure as opposed to procreation. Now, putting that aside, I want to note some of the other health issues associated with diabetes, health issues that lead to diabetes. Because he would have you believe, of course, that it's because people are just overweight. But no, that's really not how it works 100% of the time, 90% of the time, or 95% of the time. There are genetic mutations, for instance, monogenic diabetes. So that's diabetes that's caused by genetic mutations. There's also cystic fibrosis, which could not only increase the chance of getting diabetes, but you could very well get diabetes as a result of that condition. There's also hemochromatosis, which could, again, a genetic condition that could lead to the development of type 2 diabetes. This is not based on lifestyle choices, this is based on a genetic condition. But hey, according to Matt Gaetz, if you can't afford insulin to keep yourself alive, screw you, he's just gonna paint you as a fat person and be done with it. There are also hormonal diseases, including Cushing's syndrome, where your body produces excess cortisone, and then that ends up translating to type 2 diabetes. There's also hyperthyroidism, which is actually incredibly common, and that could also develop into type 2 diabetes. And these, again, are conditions that are not based on lifestyle choices that people make. But again, my point of view is, even if someone has made poor health decisions in their life and they're suffering from diabetes as a result, I think that it is the antithesis of a pro-life agenda to give that individual or those people the middle finger and tell them to go F themselves if they can't afford the medication they need to survive.
Yeah, I figured it out while we were doing the segment. So Republicans hate anyone they think is not like them. And so they circle the wagons, and if they think you're part of my identity, for whatever reason, white, Christian, in my church, in my neighborhood, so those don't have to be just race or religion, then I'm gonna circle the wagons for you. but I hate everyone outside the wagons, and I will take great pleasure in hating them. And so Matt Gaetz, I guess, thinks he's in good shape, so he doesn't relate to people who are overweight. So by definition, being a Republican these days, he feels he has to hate people who are overweight because they're not like him. If you're not like Matt Gaetz, he's gonna hate you. By the way, 25% of Florida is obese. So if
we live in America. Like, come on.
Yeah, if his district holds to the Florida average, which it likely does, that means he just gravely insulted a quarter of his voters. But for Republicans, it doesn't matter. You can call them obese, you can call their wife ugly, you can do you could have sex with underage girls apparently, right? In Matt Gaetz' district, and they don't mind any of it as long as you hate the others. So, hey, enjoy these fake populists robbing you blind on behalf of Big Pharma. And if you're a right winger who said, I'm not taking the vaccine because of Big Pharma, man. And then you say, well, you know what? If someone is overweight, I agree with Matt Gaetz. You should give Big Pharma $1,000 instead of $35. Really? Republicans, do you have any compassion left for anyone that isn't you? It's
no,
hard.
They don't. But Cenk, let's now move over to Democrats, because trying to pass legislation that just singles out one medication here, maybe another medication there. If we're lucky, maybe Democrats might propose lowering the price or capping the copay for another pharmaceutical drug. Woo! No, I mean, this is such a failed strategy, right? How about instead of singling out one medication or another, pass legislation that caps the price for all pharmaceutical drugs? That would appeal to far more Americans, since most Americans would be positively impacted by the passage of that kind of legislation. And it would be far more difficult for clowns like Matt Gaetz or any other Republican to point to a specific medication and how they don't need price caps, because people who are sick with that illness or have that disease only have it because of lifestyle choices. I mean, Democrats love to put themselves in a weaker position, but more importantly, the other thing, this is a perfect opportunity. I mean, the Democratic Party should take advantage of these comments by Matt Gaetz. This is not a politically popular opinion, but will they? No, they won't. I mean, they'll focus on other salacious stuff, which his constituents don't care about at all. But let me tell you something, whether you're a Democrat or Republican, if you can't afford the cost associated with the medications you need to survive, you're gonna care about that issue. But Democrats will just let this fall by the wayside because they do not know how to do appropriate political campaigning.
Yeah, so look, you won't get this on any other channel. On Fox News, they'll tell you Democrats are full of crap, but the Republicans are lovely, lovely people. The MSNBC will tell you that Republicans are monsters, but the Democrats are just the biggest angels you've ever seen. No, the reality is 90% of politicians are full of crap. They're lying to you 24/7. So, okay, you say you don't want price caps, easy to solve. Why don't we have Medicare negotiate drug prices on all the drugs that they buy? That would make a giant difference. It polls at over 80%. I've seen some polls where it polls over 90%. The American people definitely want it. It would lower all drug prices, yet both Democrats and Republicans agree not to do it, no matter who's in charge, because they're all criminals who have gotten bribed by drug companies. Do you see any of the fake populists on the right wing telling you that? No. They're trying to scare you about masks and vaccines, meanwhile funneling tons of profit off of your back to their big drug company donors. That's who people like Matt Gaetz are.
Thanks for watching the Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.